The world outside was painted in endless white as another merciless winter storm raged across the Alaskan wilderness. Miles from civilization, Marcus Bennett stood at his lodge's frost-covered window, watching thick snowflakes spiral down from the darkening sky. 20 years of running the last frontier lodge had taught him to read nature's warnings, and everything about this storm felt wrong. The air was too still, the snow too heavy, and the usual wilderness sounds had fallen into an unnatural silence. His weather-worn hands clutched a steaming mug of coffee as his eyes drifted to the small wooden photo booth at the edge of his property. The booth had been his wife Sarah's idea, installed last summer before her passing, meant to give tourists a fun way to capture memories of their wilderness adventures. Now, it stood alone in the growing storm, a solitary reminder of happier times. Marcus had been about to close up for the night when he first noticed the massive prints in the snow. They led from the dense forest straight toward his lodge. But what made his blood run cold was their size. In 15 years of tracking, he had never seen bear tracks this large. The tracks told an odd story that made his skin crawl. The bear had approached his lodge but then, for some inexplicable reason, had veered away from the main building and moved toward the photo booth. Through the thickening snowfall, Marcus could make out a massive dark form lying completely still in the snow beside the booth. The bear had fallen asleep there, its enormous body curled against the booth's outer wall. This sight sent chills down his spine. Bears should be deep in hibernation this time of year, not sleeping exposed in a snowstorm. Yet something had drawn this one out, something powerful enough to overcome its natural instincts. As darkness crept across the landscape, Marcus noticed more troubling details. There were other tracks in the snow, smaller ones, partially obscured but still visible. Human footprints, leading to the photo booth hours before the bear's arrival. The tracks belonged to the Anderson family, tourists from Seattle who had mentioned taking photos in the booth that afternoon. Their cabin was on the far side of the property, and he hadn't seen them return. The father, Tom, had promised to bring their 2 children, Emma and Lucas, for hot chocolate in the main lodge after their photo session. They never showed up. The wind howled outside, rattling the lodge's windows, as Marcus's gaze remained fixed on the sleeping bear and the booth. The structure's small light still glowed weakly through the snow, a lonely beacon in the growing darkness. Something was terribly wrong. The bear's massive form hadn't moved for hours, remaining in deep sleep beside the booth, as if guarding some terrible secret. The questions pounded in Marcus's head as he set down his coffee mug with trembling hands. He would have to go out there. He would have to look inside the booth. The growing sense of dread in his gut told him he already knew what he might find, but nothing could have prepared him for the horror that awaited. Marcus pulled on his heavy winter coat with trembling fingers, grabbed his rifle, and strapped a flashlight to his chest. 20 years of wilderness experience hadn't prepared him for this moment. The familiar weight of his gun offered little comfort as he stepped out into the cruel Alaskan night. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes catching in his beard and clouding his vision. Each step toward the photo booth felt like moving through a nightmare. At 50 yards distance, he could make out the bear's massive form more clearly now. The creature hadn't stirred from its strange slumber, its dark bulk rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. Fresh snow had accumulated several inches deep on its fur, suggesting it had been sleeping in the same position for hours. The sight made Marcus's skin crawl. No bear would sleep so exposed, so vulnerable in the middle of a snowstorm, unless something had compelled it to stay. His flashlight beam cut through the whirling snow, revealing details that made his stomach churn. The ground around the booth was stained with something dark, its color muted by fresh powder but unmistakably present. Blood. Not just scattered drops, but long smears across the white ground, leading directly to the booth's entrance. The crimson trails disappeared under fresh snowfall, like nature herself was trying to hide something terrible. As Marcus crept closer, he studied the sleeping bear with mounting dread. It was the largest grizzly he had ever encountered, its shoulders broader than a truck's hood, its paws massive enough to crush a man's skull with a single swipe. Yet here it lay, deep in unnatural sleep beside the small wooden structure, as if some mysterious force had appointed it guardian of whatever horror waited inside. The photo booth's light flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the disturbed snow. Shreds of torn fabric, caught on the booth's outer wall, fluttered in the wind like surrender flags. Marcus's heart nearly stopped when he recognized the bright blue material. It was from Emma Anderson's new winter coat, the one she had been so proud to show him just that morning at breakfast. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Just 15 feet from the booth now, Marcus could hear the bear's heavy breathing. The creature's massive head rested on its paws, mere inches from the booth's wall. Steam rose from its nostrils with each exhale, creating small ice crystals in its fur. Even in sleep, it looked impossibly powerful, impossibly deadly. The rifle in Marcus's hand suddenly felt as useful as a toothpick against such raw power. The tracks told a story that chilled him more than the bitter cold. The bear's massive prints showed it had circled the booth countless times before finally lying down to sleep. But the pattern was strange, methodical, almost purposeful. It hadn't tried to break in, hadn't clawed at the walls, or thrown its weight against the door. Instead, it had simply settled into the snow, as if standing guard, or waiting. The question screamed in Marcus's mind, waiting for what? The curtain hung partially open, stiff with frost, encrusted with ice. Marcus reached for it with a trembling hand, acutely aware of the sleeping giant just feet away. One wrong move, one sound too loud, and the bear might wake. The fabric crackled like breaking glass as he began to pull it aside. His flashlight beam trembled as it pierced the darkness within, and what he saw inside made him clamp his hand over his mouth to stifle a cry that would have surely woken the beast beside him. The beam of Marcus's flashlight revealed a scene of such profound horror that his legs nearly buckled beneath him. The small space inside the photo booth, normally meant to capture moments of joy, had become a frozen tomb. The Anderson family was crammed inside, their bodies contorted in positions that spoke of their desperate final moments. Tom Anderson sat slumped against the back wall, his skin a ghastly shade of blue-white. Blood had frozen in thick rivulets down his right leg, creating crimson icicles that glinted in the flashlight beam. His eyes were open but unseeing, frosted over like a frozen lake. Against his chest, he clutched his children with arms that had frozen stiff, a father's last attempt to share what little warmth his dying body could provide. Emma and Lucas were pressed against their father, their small forms nearly unrecognizable under the layers of frost that covered them. Emma's long red hair had frozen solid, brittle strands encasing her face like a crystalline shroud. Lucas's hand still gripped his inhaler, his fingers black with the early signs of frostbite. Their lips had turned a deep purple, their skin so pale it was almost translucent in the harsh light. The booth's interior told a story of desperate survival that made Marcus's heart ache. Torn pieces of clothing had been stuffed into every crack and crevice, a futile attempt to keep out the killing cold. Empty candy wrappers and a crushed water bottle suggested they had some supplies when they took shelter. Emma's beloved stuffed bear lay discarded in the corner, sacrificed in their desperation to block a gap in the wall. A cell phone with a shattered screen lay useless on the floor, their last link to salvation, destroyed. But it was the booth's digital display that revealed the full magnitude of the tragedy. The screen still functioned, cycling through photos taken over the past hours. The first showed the family smiling, unaware of their fate. The next captured the moment everything changed. Through the booth's window, the massive bear could be seen approaching. The following images documented their terror, a series of blurred shots showing panic and chaos as Tom apparently tried to defend his children. Then something in the final photos made Marcus's blood freeze. The bear, after that initial attack, had not tried to break in. Instead, it had begun its vigil, circling the booth before finally settling into the snow outside. The timestamps on the photos showed this pattern continuing for hours. The beast had simply laid there, sleeping in the bitter cold, as if waiting for the inevitable. Marcus's hand shook as he reached out to check for a pulse, though he felt certain he was too late. The skin beneath his fingers was ice-cold, hard as marble. But then, impossibly, he felt something, the faintest flutter beneath Tom's frozen skin, a weak thrum that suggested the smallest spark of life still remained. Frantically, he checked the children. Emma's neck yielded the same miracle, a pulse so weak he almost missed it. Lucas too clung to life by the thinnest of threads. They weren't dead, but they were far from alive. Their bodies had entered a state of extreme hypothermia, slowing their vital functions to nearly nothing. The very cold that should have killed them had somehow preserved them, putting them into a sort of frozen stasis. The realization of what the bear had done hit Marcus with stunning force. By sleeping against the booth, its massive body had blocked the worst of the wind. Its bulk had created a small pocket of relative warmth, just enough to prevent the family from freezing completely solid. The predator had become an unwitting protector, though its true intentions remained a mystery. Was it waiting for them to die, or had some unfathomable instinct driven it to guard them through the long frozen night? The sound of shifting snow outside made Marcus's heart stop. The bear was moving in its sleep, its massive form adjusting position against the booth wall. The wooden structure creaked with the pressure, and Emma's body twitched at the sound, proof that some part of her consciousness still lingered in that frozen form. Marcus knew he had only moments to act. The family was alive, but just barely. Every second he delayed reduced their chances of survival. Yet the bear slept just inches away, separated from him by only a thin wooden wall. One wrong move, one too loud sound, and their protector could become their executioner. The horror of their situation was now complete. The Anderson family had survived through a miracle of timing and temperature, but their salvation would require threading an impossible needle. Marcus would have to find a way to extract 3 frozen bodies from this makeshift tomb without waking the sleeping giant outside. As if sensing his thoughts, the bear let out a rumbling breath that fogged the booth's small window. The sound was a grim reminder that nature's mercy could turn to savagery in an instant. Marcus knew every second was precious, but one wrong move could turn rescue into tragedy. He forced himself to think methodically, despite the horror before him. The family's survival now depended on his ability to remain calm. Outside, the bear's massive form continued its deep slumber, steam rising from its nostrils into the frigid night air. First, he needed to check the extent of their injuries. Tom's leg wound had frozen solid, which had actually prevented him from bleeding out. The frostbite on Lucas's fingers was severe, but not yet catastrophic. Emma's exposed arms showed the mottled patterns of deep tissue freezing. All three exhibited the hallmark signs of severe hypothermia, skin waxy and pale, their breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. The wind howled outside as Marcus removed his heavy coat, laying it across Emma and Lucas. The bitter cold immediately bit through his wool shirt, but he knew hypothermia victims needed warmth more than he did. He pulled an emergency radio from his belt, keeping the volume barely above a whisper. "This is Marcus at Last Frontier Lodge," he breathed into the device. "Code Blue. 3 victims. Severe hypothermia. Need immediate medevac on site. I repeat, active bear situation." The response came as a barely audible crackle. The storm was interfering with transmission, but he caught fragments about a helicopter being dispatched. They would need to land at the lodge's helipad, nearly a quarter-mile away. Somehow, he had to transport 3 frozen bodies through deep snow without waking the sleeping giant outside. Moving with glacial slowness, Marcus began the delicate process of extracting Lucas first. The boy's body had frozen partially to the bench, his clothes stuck fast to the metal surface. Every movement produced tiny crackling sounds that made Marcus's heart stop. His eyes darted to the window, where the bear's massive head rested just inches away. Lucas came free with a sound like tearing paper. Marcus caught him before he could fall, cradling the boy's rigid form. The child weighed almost nothing in his arms, his small body frozen nearly solid. Through the booth's window, Marcus could see the bear's ear twitch at the sound, but the creature remained lost in its mysterious slumber. Emma proved more difficult to move. Her frozen hair had become tangled in the booth's mechanical components, and each strand that broke sounded like a gunshot in the confined space. When he finally freed her, he discovered that her legs had frozen at an angle that made it nearly impossible to fit her through the narrow door while keeping her body level, as proper hypothermia protocol demanded. The worst challenge was Tom. The man's larger frame had frozen into a protective curl around where his children had been, and his injured leg had frozen to the floor in a pool of his own blood. Any attempt to break that hold risked causing a sound that would surely wake the bear. But leaving him was not an option. Marcus made a decision that went against every medical training protocol he knew. He would have to partially thaw Tom's leg using his own body heat, pressing his bare hands against the frozen blood. He felt his skin stick to the ice. The pain was immediate and searing, but he held position, watching through the window as the bear continued its deep sleep, mere inches away. Minutes passed like hours as Marcus worked to free Tom. Every crack of breaking ice, every scrape of fabric against the booth's walls, sent spikes of terror through him. The bear's breathing remained deep and steady, but its massive paws occasionally twitched, suggesting it was dreaming. Marcus prayed it wasn't dreaming of food. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he had managed to position all 3 victims near the booth's entrance. Now came the most dangerous part. They would need to exit the booth and move through the deep snow past the sleeping bear without making a sound. The snow's crust had hardened in the bitter cold, and each step would risk breaking through with a loud crack. The storm had intensified, which was both a blessing and a curse. The howling wind would help mask some sounds, but it also meant the helicopter would have a harder time landing. The temperature had dropped even further, and Marcus could feel his own body starting to shake uncontrollably from exposure. His bare arms had gone numb, and his fingers were starting to turn an alarming shade of white. With infinite care, he began to pull Lucas through the curtain. The fabric, frozen stiff, made a sound like breaking glass. The bear's ear twitched again, and its massive head lifted slightly before settling back down. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he feared the beast might hear it, but there was no turning back now. The Anderson family's only chance of survival lay in his ability to move 3 frozen bodies through the snow without waking their sleeping guardian. In the distance, barely audible above the storm, he heard the first faint thrum of helicopter blades. Help was coming, but he still had to get them all to safety. As if sensing the approaching rescue, the bear shifted in its sleep. Its enormous body pressed harder against the booth's outer wall. The entire structure groaned under the pressure. Marcus looked down at the frozen family he held in his arms, then at the sleeping giant that had become both their protector and potential executioner. The real horror wasn't just what he had found inside the booth. It was knowing that their salvation or doom rested entirely on whether the bear continued its inexplicable slumber. In the snow, the distance to the lodge had never seemed so vast. Marcus moved through the deep snow with agonizing slowness, his body trembling from cold and exhaustion. He had managed to secure Lucas and Emma in his coat, creating a makeshift sled to pull them through the snow. Tom's frozen form he half-carried, half-dragged, trying to keep the injured leg from catching on the crusty snow surface. Every few feet, he glanced back at the photo booth, where the bear remained in its mysterious slumber. The creature's dark bulk was becoming harder to see through the intensifying storm, but its presence weighed on him like a physical thing. The helicopter sounds grew louder, and Marcus silently prayed the noise wouldn't wake the sleeping giant. The wind cut through his thin shirt like knives, and his exposed skin had gone beyond pain into a dangerous numbness. But the frozen family behind him was in far worse condition. The extreme cold that had preserved their lives could still claim them if he didn't reach help in time. Each step required careful placement to prevent the snow's crust from breaking with a telling crack. Halfway to the lodge, Lucas's body suddenly jerked with a violent shiver. It was both terrifying and hopeful. The boy was showing signs of life, but the movement caused his frozen clothes to scrape against the icy snow. The sound seemed to carry forever in the winter air. Marcus froze. His eyes locked on the distant photo booth. The bear's massive head lifted, and for one heart-stopping moment, he thought it would rise. But after a seemingly endless pause, it settled back into its snow bed, still lost in whatever strange dreams held it there. The helicopter was close now, its searchlight cutting through the swirling snow. Marcus could see the lodge's windows glowing warmly ahead, promising sanctuary. But the noise of the approaching aircraft grew louder, drowning out even the howling wind. The vibrations traveled through the frozen ground, and Marcus watched in horror as the bear finally began to stir. With the last of his strength, he lifted Tom's frozen form and pushed forward. The snow's crust broke beneath his feet with sharp reports like gunshots. Behind him, he heard the sound of something massive shaking off snow, followed by a deep rumble that he felt in his bones. The bear was awakening. The lodge's front door burst open, spilling warm light across the snow. Rescue workers poured out, moving toward him with emergency blankets and medical equipment. Their shouts seemed impossibly loud after the long silence of his rescue effort. Marcus stumbled the final few steps and felt strong hands take the frozen family from him. Only then did he turn to look back through the curtain of falling snow. He saw the bear rise to its full height beside the photo booth. Its massive form was silhouetted against the storm, steam rising from its fur into the frigid air. For a long moment, it stood completely still, as if contemplating the scene before it. Then, without a sound, it turned and padded into the forest, disappearing into the swirling white darkness as mysteriously as it had appeared. Hours later, Marcus sat in the hospital waiting room, his own hands bandaged from frostbite. The doctors had called it a miracle the Anderson family had survived. Their core temperatures were low enough to preserve brain function but not so low as to prove fatal. Tom's leg would need extensive surgery, but he would keep it. The children, thanks to their father's protection and the strange circumstances of their ordeal, would make full recoveries. Yet, questions haunted Marcus. Why had the bear not entered the booth? What had compelled it to sleep in the snow beside it through the long, frozen night? The experts who came to investigate found no explanations. The bear's tracks told a story that defied natural behavior. It had not been hibernating, had not been injured or sick. It had simply chosen to stay, to sleep in the deadly cold, as if standing guard over the family trapped inside the photo booth. The memory card revealed no answers, only images that would stay with Marcus forever. The final photo, taken just before he had rescued them, showed the bear's huge form pressed against the booth's window. Its breath frosting the glass in the dim reflection, its eyes seemed almost human, filled with an intelligence that defied explanation. When the Anderson family recovered enough to tell their story, they had no idea they had been guarded through the night. Their last memories were of the initial attack, of Tom fighting to protect his children, of taking refuge in the booth as their only hope of survival. They had fallen into hypothermic sleep, believing the bear meant to kill them, never knowing it had become their unlikely savior. The booth still stands at the edge of Marcus property, though tourists now use it on bitter winter nights. When the snow falls thick and silent, he sometimes stands at his window and watches it. And sometimes, in the deep darkness of the Alaskan winter, he swears he sees a massive shape circle the small structure before lying down to sleep in the snow, guarding secrets that nature never meant to share.